The champagne flute trembled in my hand as I watched Miles's face drain of colour. The entire reception hall had fallen silent after my toast, 200 guests staring at us with expressions ranging from shock to second-hand embarrassment. I had just told everyone about Theo being my first love, and how enlightened our marriage was, that I could invite him to celebrate with us. "Evadne," Miles whispered, his voice barely audible over the clinking of silverware. "What did you just say?" I laughed, the sound sharp and brittle in the golden-lit restaurant. "Oh, come on, honey. Everyone knows about Theo. We're all adults here." I gestured toward the corner table where Theo Morel sat, with his knowing smirk, raising his glass to me in a mock salute. My mother, Livia, beamed from the head table. "That's my daughter," she announced to anyone within earshot. "So progressive, so honest about love in all its forms." But Miles's mother, Margaret, looked like she'd swallowed glass. Her husband, Miles's father, stared down at his plate as if it contained the secrets of the universe. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. "I think," Miles said slowly, his wedding ring catching the light as his hand shook, "I need some air." He stood up abruptly, the movement so sudden that his chair scraped against the hardwood floor with a screech that made everyone wince. That's when it happened. The ring, our ring, the symbol of everything we'd just promised each other, slipped from his trembling finger and hit the floor with a tiny, metallic ping that somehow echoed through the entire room. The sound was deafening in the silence. Miles stared down at the ring for a long moment, then looked back up at me. His eyes were different now, not hurt, not angry, but empty, completely, utterly empty. "Miles?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. The power I'd felt moments before, the thrill of being the bold, modern bride who could shock everyone with her honesty, evaporated like smoke. He didn't pick up the ring. He just walked away, his footsteps echoing through the reception hall as 200 people watched him leave his own wedding reception. Someone coughed. A chair squeaked. Theo's laugh cut through the air like a knife. I stood there, still holding my champagne, staring at the ring on the floor. My wedding dress suddenly felt too tight, too heavy, too much. The joke I'd thought was so clever, so empowering, lay between us like a chasm I couldn't cross. "Well," my father Alan said quietly from behind me, "I hope you know what you've done, Evadne." But I didn't. Not yet. The next morning, I woke up alone in our king-sized bed, still wearing my wedding dress. The fabric was wrinkled and stained with champagne, and my head pounded from too much alcohol and too little sleep. Miles's side of the bed was untouched, the covers still perfectly smooth. I found him in the kitchen, fully dressed in his work clothes, drinking coffee and staring out the window at the city skyline. He didn't look at me when I entered. "Miles," I started, my voice hoarse. "About last night. I don't want to talk about it." His voice was flat, emotionless. He set down his mug and picked up his briefcase. "I'm going to work." "It's Sunday," I said, confused. "I have things to catch up on." He finally looked at me, and that emptiness was still there in his eyes. "I'll be late tonight." After he left, I sat in our modern apartment, surrounded by wedding gifts we hadn't even opened yet, and tried to make sense of what had happened. Had I really done something so terrible? All I'd done was be honest about my past, about the fact that Theo and I had reconnected recently. We lived in the 21st century, for God's sake. People could be friends with their exes. My phone buzzed with the text from Theo. "Last night was perfect chaos. You're still the most fun I've ever known." I smiled despite myself, remembering the way he'd looked at me during the reception, the way he'd made me feel alive and dangerous and free. Miles had always been so serious, so controlled. Theo reminded me of who I used to be before I became half of a couple. I deleted the message and opened Instagram instead, crafting a post about modern love and grown-up relationships where people could be honest about their connections. The likes and comments started pouring in immediately. mostly from friends who called me brave and authentic. But there were other comments too, ones that made my stomach twist. "Poor Miles," someone wrote. "I can't believe she did that to him at their own wedding." I deleted those comments as fast as they appeared. My best friend Simone called around noon. "Evadne, honey, are you okay? People are talking about last night." "Let them talk," I said, pacing around the living room. I refuse to be ashamed of being honest about my life. But inviting your ex to your wedding and then announcing it in your toast, that's pretty intense, even for you. Theo and I are friends. Miles knew he was coming. Did he know you were going to announce that he was your first love in front of everyone? I paused. Miles is just being dramatic. He'll get over it. But even as I said the words, I remembered the sound of the ring hitting the floor, the look on his face before he walked away. I pushed the memory aside and focused on defending myself instead. When Miles came home that night, he went straight to the bedroom without saying a word. I found his wedding suit hanging in the closet, perfectly pressed and put away. His wedding ring sat on the dresser next to his wallet and keys, like just another piece of everyday jewelry he'd taken off after work. "Miles," I said from the doorway, "we need to talk about this." "Do we?" He didn't turn around. "I think you said everything you needed to say last night." "I was just being honest. I thought you'd appreciate that." He finally looked at me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, pain maybe, or disappointment. But then it was gone, replaced by that terrible emptiness again. "Honest," he repeated. "Is that what you call it?" I wanted to explain, to make him understand that what Theo and I had was just friendship, just a connection to my past that didn't threaten our future. But the words wouldn't come, and Miles turned away from me again, dismissing me without another word. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Miles's steady breathing beside me. We were married now, legally bound, but I'd never felt further away from another person in my life. Monday morning at work was a nightmare. I ran an event planning company downtown, and normally I loved walking into the office, loved the energy and creativity that filled the space. But today, conversation stopped when I entered rooms. People looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and pity that made my skin crawl. "Evadne," my assistant Jennifer said carefully, "there are some things we need to discuss about the Morrison wedding next weekend." But I could tell from her expression that she wanted to ask about my wedding, about the video that was apparently circulating on social media of Miles dropping the ring and walking away. Someone had filmed it, of course. Someone always films everything now. "The Morrison wedding will be fine," I said curtly, shutting myself in my office and closing the door. My phone rang constantly, reporters wanting comments, friends wanting gossip, family members wanting explanations. I ignored most of the calls, but when my mother called for the third time, I finally answered. "Darling," Livia said, her voice bright with forced cheer, "I've been getting the most interesting calls this morning. Apparently, some people are saying you humiliated Miles at the reception." "Some people need to mind their own business." "Of course they do, sweetheart. You were just being authentic. Miles will come around once he realizes how lucky he is to have such an honest, modern wife." But even my mother's unwavering support couldn't drown out the other voices. My father had left 2 voicemails, both asking me to call him back urgently. Miles's brother Oliver had sent a text that simply read, "What the hell were you thinking?" The worst part was the silence from Miles himself. He'd left for work before I woke up, and when I tried calling him, it went straight to voicemail. When I texted him, the messages showed as delivered but never read. That evening, I went to my parents' house for dinner, hoping for some normalcy and support. But the moment I walked in, I could feel the tension in the air. "Evadne," my father said, not bothering with pleasantries, "sit down. We need to talk." "Alan," my mother warned, "be gentle." "Gentle?" He looked at me with disappointment written all across his face. "Our daughter just destroyed her marriage on live social media, And you want me to be gentle? I didn't destroy anything, I protested. I was honest about my past. If Miles can't handle that, then maybe we have bigger problems. You invited your ex-boyfriend to your wedding, my father said slowly, then announced to everyone that he was your first love, and you think Miles is the one with the problem? Theo and I are friends. We reconnected recently, and yes, we have history, but that doesn't mean— Reconnected how recently? My father interrupted. I hesitated. A few months ago. A few months ago. While you were engaged to Miles. It's not what you're thinking. But even as I said it, I could feel my face flushing. Because it wasn't entirely innocent, was it? The long conversations, the text messages, the way Theo made me feel like the person I used to be before I became Miles's fiancé. The way we'd kissed that night at his loft 3 weeks before the wedding. The way I'd told myself it didn't mean anything. Oh, honey, my mother said softly, and for the first time, she looked worried instead of proud. I left my parents' house feeling more alone than ever. When I got home, Miles was sitting at the kitchen table with a folder in front of him. He looked up when I entered, and I saw something in his expression that made my blood run cold. We need to talk, he said. Okay. I sat down across from him, trying to read his face. What's in the folder? He opened it without a word. Inside were printouts, screenshots of text messages between Theo and me, photos of us together that I didn't even remember being taken, bank statements showing charges at restaurants where we'd met for innocent lunches. My heart stopped. Miles, I can explain. Can you? He picked up one of the screenshots, a message from Theo that read, I can't stop thinking about the other night. You're incredible, Evadne. The timestamp showed it was sent 2 days after our engagement party. That's not what it looks like. Then what is it, Evadne? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like my wife has been having an affair with her ex-boyfriend and then decided to humiliate me with it in front of everyone we know. The word affair hung in the air between us like a bomb. I wanted to deny it, to explain that it wasn't really an affair, just a connection, just friendship with some complicated feelings. But looking at the evidence spread out on the table, I realized how it must look to him. Miles, I said quietly, I never meant for this to hurt you. He stared at me for a long moment, then carefully gathered up all the papers and put them back in the folder. I know, he said finally. That's the worst part. You never thought about me at all. He stood up and walked toward the bedroom, leaving me sitting alone at the kitchen table. A few minutes later, I heard the front door close. When I went to check, his wedding ring was on the counter next to the folder, and Miles was gone. The next 3 days passed in a blur of humiliation and damage control. The video of Miles dropping the ring had gone viral in our social circle, shared and reshared, until everyone we knew had seen it. The comments were brutal. She really announced her affair at her own wedding. Poor Miles. He deserves so much better. The audacity of this woman is unbelievable. I tried to control the narrative, posting carefully crafted messages about complex adult relationships and the courage to live authentically. But for every supportive comment, there were 10 more that tore me apart. My workplace became a minefield. Clients started asking for different planners. Jennifer looked at me with barely concealed disgust. The Morrison wedding was reassigned to my colleague Sarah after the bride specifically requested that I not be involved. It's temporary, my boss assured me, but we both knew it wasn't. Who wants their wedding planned by someone who humiliated their own husband at their reception? I found myself spending more time at Theo's loft in the Arts District, a converted warehouse space filled with canvases and sculptures and the kind of creative chaos that Miles had always found messy. Theo thought the whole situation was hilarious. You really shook things up, he said, pouring wine into mismatched glasses. I have to admire your style, Evadne. Most people would have hidden our connection, but you put it right out there. I thought honesty was important, I said, though the words felt hollow now. It is. Miles just can't handle a woman who knows what she wants. But even Theo's validation couldn't drown out the growing chorus of criticism. My best friend Simone had stopped returning my calls. My sister-in-law Tessa was spreading rumors about the affair throughout the family. Even my mother seemed less certain in her support. Maybe, Livia suggested carefully during one of our phone calls, you could make some kind of public apology, just to smooth things over. Apologize for being honest about my life. Apologize for the way you handled it, darling. The timing was unfortunate. But I couldn't bring myself to apologize. That would mean admitting I was wrong, and I wasn't wrong. I was just ahead of my time, too progressive for people who still believed in outdated ideas about marriage and fidelity. Miles continued to avoid me. He came home late, left early, and spoke to me only when absolutely necessary. When I tried to bring up the folder, the evidence he'd gathered, he just looked at me with that empty expression and walked away. We can work through this, I told him one evening, as he packed clothes into a suitcase. Couples therapy, counseling, whatever you want. Can we? He folded a shirt with mechanical precision. Because I keep thinking about our wedding day, about the moment you decided to tell everyone about Theo, and I realize that in that moment, you chose to humiliate me in front of everyone we know rather than protect our marriage. So I'm wondering what exactly we'd be working toward. I chose honesty. You chose cruelty. He closed the suitcase and picked it up. There's a difference. Where are you going? Oliver's place. I need some space to think. That was Thursday night. On Friday morning, I woke up to find a courier at my door with an envelope marked Urgent Legal Documents. Inside was a formal notice of separation, a petition for annulment based on fraud and misrepresentation, and a restraining order preventing me from making any public statements about Miles or our marriage. At the bottom was a note in Miles's careful handwriting. The ring is in the kitchen. Consider this my final return. I found it on the counter next to a receipt from the jewelry store. Refund processed, $8,500, was stamped across the bottom in red ink. My hands were shaking as I called his phone, but it went straight to a number that was no longer in service. He'd changed his number. He'd planned this, prepared for it, gathered his evidence, and built his case while I was posting inspirational quotes about authentic living on social media. The doorbell rang again. This time, it was a reporter from the local lifestyle blog, wanting a comment about the wedding toast heard round the world. Behind her was a photographer, already snapping pictures of me in my pajamas, holding legal documents. No comment, I said, slamming the door. But it was too late. By evening, the story was everywhere. Local event planners' marriage implodes after wedding reception affair announcement. They had quotes from wedding guests, screenshots of my social media posts, even a statement from Miles's lawyer about the annulment proceedings. I was trending on local Twitter. Wedding toast fail was picking up steam nationally. Someone had created a TikTok compilation of the worst wedding toasts of all time, and mine was number one. My phone rang constantly with reporters, bloggers, and podcasters wanting interviews. My email was flooded with hate mail and job inquiries that turned out to be pranks. Someone had posted my work address online, and protesters were gathering outside the building with signs reading, "Honesty isn't always the best policy," and "Justice for Miles." I called Theo, desperate for support, for someone to tell me this would all blow over. "This is insane," I said. "They're acting like I committed murder." "It's pretty wild," he agreed, but I could hear the distance in his voice. "Listen, Evadne, I think maybe we should cool things down for a while. This attention is getting a little intense for me." "Cool things down?" "Just until the media circus dies down. You understand, right? I can't have this affecting my work." Even Theo was abandoning me. The man I'd destroyed my marriage for was backing away the moment things got difficult. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by unopened wedding gifts and legal documents, and finally understood what I'd lost. Not just Miles, but everything. My reputation, My career, my friends, my family's respect. All for what? For a man who wouldn't even stand by me when the consequences came due. The ring sat on the counter, catching the light from the kitchen window. Such a small thing to cause so much destruction. But it wasn't really about the ring, was it? It was about the moment I chose my own ego over my husband's dignity, the moment I decided that being shocking was more important than being kind. I picked up the ring and held it up to the light, remembering the day Miles had proposed, the way his hands shook as he asked me to marry him. He'd been so nervous, so hopeful, so sure that I was the person he wanted to spend his life with. I'd thrown it all away for a punchline that no one was laughing at anymore. The following Monday, I was fired. "It's not personal, Evadne," my boss explained, though she couldn't meet my eyes. "But we've lost 3 major clients since Friday, and the board feels that your continued employment here is damaging our brand. You're firing me because of my personal life. We're terminating your employment because your personal life has become a public spectacle that's affecting our business." The Morrison wedding was a disaster. The bride saw the news coverage and demanded a full refund because she was afraid of being associated with our company. I cleaned out my desk while my former colleagues watched from a distance, whispering among themselves. Jennifer, my assistant who I'd mentored for 2 years, didn't even say goodbye. The legal proceedings moved forward with terrifying efficiency. Miles had been thorough in his preparation. Every text message, every photo, every credit card receipt from my meetings with Theo was catalogued and presented as evidence of fraud and misrepresentation. His lawyer argued that I had entered the marriage under false pretenses, hiding an ongoing affair and planning to continue it after the wedding. "My client has grounds for annulment based on fraud," Miles's attorney explained during our first meeting. Mrs. Chessel's public admission of her relationship with Mr. Morell, combined with the documented evidence of their affair during the engagement period, constitutes a material misrepresentation that goes to the very heart of the marriage contract. My own lawyer, a tired-looking woman named Patricia Wells, reviewed the evidence with barely concealed dismay. "They have everything, Evadne. Photos, messages, financial records, witness testimony. Even if we wanted to fight this, I'm not sure what our defense would be. I never lied about Theo. You never told the truth about him either. And according to these documents, you were meeting with him regularly throughout your engagement, exchanging intimate messages, and engaging in physical contact. That's an affair by any legal definition." The restraining order meant I couldn't defend myself publicly. While the internet tore me apart, I was legally prohibited from responding, from telling my side of the story, from explaining that it wasn't as simple as everyone thought. Not that anyone would have listened anyway. My family was fracturing under the pressure. My father refused to speak to me, telling my mother that I'd brought shame on the family name. My mother still supported me publicly, but I could hear the doubt creeping into her voice during our phone calls. "Maybe," she suggested gently, "you could write Miles a letter, something private just to apologize for the way things happened." "Why should I apologize for being honest about my feelings?" "Because honesty without kindness is just cruelty, sweetheart, and you were cruel to that boy." Even my mother was turning against me. The worst part was the isolation. Simone had blocked me on all social media. Tessa was actively spreading rumors about other affairs she claimed I'd had. My professional network had evaporated overnight. Invitations to social events dried up. Even the coffee shop near my apartment started giving me strange looks when I came in. I was becoming a pariah, the cautionary tale people told about what happens when you take honesty too far. Theo had completely disappeared from my life, ignoring my calls and messages. When I went to his loft, the building manager told me he'd moved out suddenly, leaving no forwarding address. He'd abandoned me as thoroughly as everyone else. The financial implications were devastating. Without my job, I couldn't afford the apartment Miles and I had shared. The legal fees were mounting. My savings, which had been earmarked for our honeymoon and future together, were being drained by Patricia's hourly rate. "We need to discuss settlement options," Patricia told me during our third meeting. "Miles is offering a clean break. You keep your personal belongings in your car, he keeps everything else. No alimony, no shared assets. Given the circumstances, it's a generous offer." "Generous? We were married for less than a week." "Exactly. And you spent that week publicly humiliating him and exposing an affair that lasted throughout your engagement. He could sue you for emotional distress, defamation, even fraud. This offer makes all of that go away." I stared at the settlement documents, trying to process what I was reading. Miles was taking the apartment, the wedding gifts, the joint savings account, even the car we'd bought together. I would be left with essentially nothing except my personal belongings and the wreckage of my reputation. What if I don't sign? Then we go to trial, where all of this evidence gets presented publicly, and you lose anyway. Plus, you'll owe him attorney's fees and probably damages. Evadne, this isn't a fight you can win. That night, I sat in the empty apartment. Miles had already moved out his belongings while I was at work, and tried to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. A week ago, I'd been a successful businesswoman with a new husband and a bright future. Now I was unemployed, alone, and facing financial ruin. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Oliver. Miles asked me to tell you that the final paperwork will be ready tomorrow. He wanted you to know that he's not doing this to hurt you. He's doing it to protect himself from any more humiliation. Maybe you can understand that." I typed and deleted a dozen responses, but what was there to say? That I was sorry, that I never meant for things to go this far, that I'd made a terrible mistake. All of those things were true, but they were also too late. The ring was still sitting on the kitchen counter, catching the morning light. In a few hours, I'd have to give it back officially, along with everything else I'd gained and lost in the span of a week. I picked it up one last time, remembering the weight of it on my finger during those few brief hours when I'd been someone's wife. It felt heavier now, weighted down with everything it represented. The promises I'd broken, the trust I'd destroyed, the future I'd thrown away for a moment of feeling clever and dangerous and free. Tomorrow, I would sign the papers and officially end the shortest marriage in my family's history. Tonight, I would sit with the consequences of my choices and try to figure out how to rebuild a life from the ashes of my own making. The ring caught the light one last time before I set it down. In the morning, even that small connection to what I'd lost would be gone forever. The law offices of Brennan, Walsh and Associates occupied the entire 15th floor of a downtown skyscraper, all gleaming marble and mahogany that spoke of serious money and serious consequences. I sat in the conference room, Patricia beside me, waiting for Miles to arrive for the final settlement meeting. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. The man I'd married a week ago had been nervous, hopeful, eager to please. This version of Miles moved with quiet confidence, his shoulders straight, his expression calm and professional. He nodded politely to Patricia and me, then took his seat across the table as if we were strangers negotiating a business deal, which, I suppose, we were. "Let's begin," said his attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Rebecca Crane who'd built her reputation destroying unfaithful spouses in high-profile divorces. "We're here to finalize the annulment of the marriage between Miles Chessel and Evadne Chessel, based on fraud and misrepresentation." She opened a thick folder and began laying out documents with surgical precision. Photos of Theo and me at restaurants, printouts of our text messages, credit card statements showing charges at hotels where we'd met, even security camera footage from his apartment building showing me entering and leaving at suspicious hours. The evidence clearly shows that Mrs. Chessel was engaged in an ongoing intimate relationship with Theodore Morell throughout her engagement to my client, Rebecca continued. She concealed this relationship, lied about the nature of her connection to Mr. Morel, and then publicly humiliated my client by announcing this relationship at their wedding reception. Patricia shuffled through her own papers, but we both knew she had nothing to counter with. The evidence was overwhelming, damning, and completely accurate. Furthermore, Rebecca said, Mrs. Chessel's subsequent social media posts and public statements have caused significant damage to my client's reputation and emotional well-being. The video of the wedding reception has been viewed over 2 million times, making my client the subject of international mockery and humiliation. 2 million times. I felt sick thinking about millions of strangers watching Miles's face as I announced my connection to Theo, watching him drop the ring and walk away in devastation. However, Rebecca continued, my client is prepared to be generous in his settlement offer, provided Mrs. Chessel agrees to the terms we've outlined. I looked at Miles, trying to read his expression, but his face was a mask of professional calm. This wasn't the man who'd once told me I was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen, who'd planned surprise weekend trips and left little love notes in my purse. This was someone who'd been hurt so deeply that he'd transformed into someone else entirely. The terms are simple, Rebecca said. Mrs. Chessel will receive her personal belongings, her vehicle, and $5,000 to assist with relocation expenses. She will relinquish all claims to marital assets, including the apartment, joint savings accounts, and wedding gifts. She will also agree to a permanent non-disclosure agreement regarding the marriage and its dissolution. That's it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. $5,000? Given the circumstances, Rebecca replied coldly, my client considers this extremely generous. Mrs. Chessel entered this marriage fraudulently and has caused significant financial and reputational damage. She's fortunate my client isn't pursuing additional damages. Patricia leaned over to whisper in my ear, take it. This is better than anything we'll get in court. I stared at the settlement documents, trying to process the complete destruction of everything I'd built. My career was gone. My reputation was in ruins. My family was ashamed of me. My friends had abandoned me. And now I was about to lose everything else too. I need a moment, I said, standing up abruptly and walking to the window. The city spread out below me, millions of people living their lives, completely unaware of the small drama playing out 15 floors above them. Behind me, I heard Rebecca's voice. Mrs. Chessel, we need a decision. My client has been more than patient. I turned back to the table, looking at Miles one last time. Can I ask you something? He met my eyes for the first time since entering the room. What? Did you ever love me, really? For a moment, the professional mask slipped, and I saw a flicker of the man I'd married. Yes, he said quietly. I loved you completely. That's why this hurts so much. Then why can't we try to work through this? People make mistakes, Miles. People have affairs and recover from them. We could go to counseling, we could... You didn't just have an affair, Evadne. His voice was steady, but I could hear the pain underneath. You humiliated me in front of everyone we know. You turned our wedding into a public joke. You made me a laughingstock on the internet. That's not something you work through in counseling. You never meant to get caught, he interrupted. There's a difference. The words hit me like a physical blow because they were true. I hadn't meant for any of this to come to light. I thought I could have my excitement with Theo and my security with Miles, and no one would ever know the difference. The video has 2 million views, Miles continued, his voice getting stronger. 2 million people have watched you announce your affair at our wedding. Do you have any idea what that's like? Going to work every day, knowing that everyone has seen me being humiliated by my own wife. Having strangers on the street recognize me as that guy from the wedding video. I hadn't thought about that. I'd been so focused on defending myself, on justifying my actions, that I hadn't really considered what it was like for him to be the subject of viral mockery. I'm sorry, I whispered. I know you are, he said, but sorry doesn't undo the damage. Sorry doesn't give me back my dignity. Sorry doesn't make 2 million people forget what they saw. Rebecca cleared her throat. Mrs. Chessel, we really do need a decision. I looked down at the papers one more time, at the legal language that would officially end the marriage I'd destroyed with my own selfishness. $5,000 and my personal belongings. That's what 7 years of relationship and 1 week of marriage had come down to. Where do I sign? I asked. The signing took less than 10 minutes. My signature on a few pieces of paper, officially acknowledging that I'd entered the marriage fraudulently and agreeing to the dissolution of all marital bonds. When it was done, Rebecca gathered up all the documents with efficient satisfaction. The annulment will be finalized within 30 days, she said. Mrs. Chessel, you have 48 hours to remove your belongings from the marital residence. Miles stood up to leave, but paused at the door. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the wedding ring, setting it on the conference table. I believe this belongs to you, he said. Consider it a reminder. After he left, I sat alone in the conference room, staring at the ring. Patricia had gone to file the paperwork, and the building was quiet except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic 15 floors below. I picked up the ring and held it to the light one last time. Such a small thing to represent so much destruction. In the space of a week, I'd gone from successful businesswoman and newlywed to unemployed, divorced, and alone. All because I'd thought I was clever enough to have everything I wanted without consequences. My phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had posted a new video. Wedding toast disaster, where are they now? It already had 50,000 views. I turned off the phone and put it away. There would be more videos, more articles, more reminders of my public humiliation. I would be forever known as the woman who announced her affair at her own wedding, the cautionary tale people told about honesty taken too far. The ring felt cold in my palm. I thought about keeping it, about holding on to this one small piece of what I'd lost. But what was the point? It represented a marriage that had never really existed, promises I'd never intended to keep, a love I'd thrown away for the thrill of feeling dangerous and free. I left the ring on the conference table and walked out of the law office, into the elevator, through the marble lobby, and out onto the street. Behind me, 15 floors up, sat the evidence of my complete and total defeat. Miles had won, not through cruelty or revenge, but through patience, preparation, and the simple power of truth. He'd gathered the evidence, built his case, and destroyed me with my own actions. It was elegant, efficient, and completely devastating. As I walked to my car, I passed a newsstand where a local magazine featured a cover story about social media disasters. There, in a small sidebar, was a photo from our wedding reception. Me raising my glass in a toast, while Miles stared at me in horror. "The toast that broke the internet," read the caption. I bought a copy, though I'm not sure why. Maybe I needed a physical reminder of how completely I'd destroyed everything good in my life. Maybe I wanted proof that this had really happened, that I'd really been this foolish and selfish and blind. Or maybe I just wanted to remember what it felt like to be someone who thought she was clever enough to have everything she wanted without paying the price. The magazine felt heavy in my hands as I drove away from downtown, away from the life I'd built and destroyed in equal measure. In my rearview mirror, the city skyline grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely. Somewhere in that city, Miles was starting over, rebuilding his life without the woman who'd betrayed and humiliated him. Somewhere else, Theo was probably laughing about the chaos he'd helped create, moving on to his next adventure without a second thought for the destruction left in his wake. And somewhere in between, I was driving toward an uncertain future with $5,000, a car full of personal belongings, and the knowledge that I'd had everything and thrown it all away for a joke that no one was laughing at anymore. The ring was gone, the marriage was gone, the life I'd built was gone. All that remained was the truth. I'd humiliated the man who loved me, and he'd responded by showing me exactly what justice looked like when it was patient, thorough, and completely deserved. As I reached the city limits, I realized I had no idea where I was going. For the first time in my adult life, I had no plan, no safety net, no one waiting for me anywhere. I was completely, utterly alone with the consequences of my choices. I pulled over at a gas station and sat in my car, holding the magazine with my face on the cover. 2 million people had watched my marriage implode. Millions more had read about it, shared it, laughed about it. I was famous now, but for all the wrong reasons. My phone rang. Unknown number. Probably another reporter wanting a comment about the settlement. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. "Hi, this is Janet Morrison. You planned my sister's wedding last year. I heard about what happened with your marriage, and I just wanted to say, I think what you did took real courage. Standing up for authentic love, being honest about your feelings. I'm getting married next spring, and I'd love to talk to you about planning our wedding. Call me back." I stared at the phone in disbelief. Someone wanted to hire me? After everything that had happened, someone thought what I'd done was admirable. I almost called her back, almost convinced myself that maybe this was a sign, that maybe I could rebuild my career on the foundation of my notoriety. But then I remembered Miles's face as he dropped the ring, remembered the pain in his voice when he said he'd loved me completely. I deleted the message. Some things couldn't be rebuilt. Some mistakes were too big to recover from. Some prices were too high to be worth paying. I started the car and pulled back onto the highway, driving toward whatever came next. In the rearview mirror, the city disappeared completely, taking with it everything I'd ever been and everything I'd ever wanted to be. The road ahead was empty, uncertain, and completely my own. For better or worse, I would face it alone, carrying nothing but the weight of my choices and the knowledge that sometimes, when you think you're clever enough to have everything, you end up with nothing at all. Miles had his revenge, complete and total, and absolutely justified. And I had mine too, in a way. The knowledge that I'd destroyed everything good in my life for a man who'd abandoned me the moment things got difficult, and a moment of feeling clever that had cost me everything I'd ever cared about. Justice, it turned out, was exactly what it looked like when someone patient and methodical and completely betrayed decided that enough was enough. The highway stretched ahead, empty and endless. I drove toward the horizon, toward whatever life awaited someone who'd learned too late that honesty without kindness wasn't honesty at all. It was just cruelty dressed up in prettier words. Behind me, the ring sat on a conference table 15 floors above the city, catching the afternoon light one last time before someone swept it into a trash can with the rest of the debris from my demolished life.